Epsilon 5 had been silent for ages. It drifted through the Black Sea like a fossilized thought, wrapped in cold light and memory. No wind stirred its lifeless plains, no sound disturbed its endless night, and yet, buried beneath its surface, the air trembled with a rhythm that no living ear could hear. It was not sound but resonance, a faint and ancient pulse, the heartbeat of something that had never entirely died. Lena had studied the signals for years before she convinced the Expedition Council to let her go. The data was inconclusive, the risk intolerable, but she could not ignore what she had found, a faint harmonic whisper bleeding through the cosmic background, aligning with coordinates that had not appeared on any stellar map. Those coordinates pointed to Epsilon 5, a world long dismissed as uninhabitable, but her instruments spoke of energy, of order hidden within decay. And so she went, not for glory, but for a truth she could no longer ignore. Orion accompanied her because no one else would. He was not a scientist by nature but an engineer and pilot, a man who trusted what he could see and touch. The thought of invisible webs spanning galaxies amused him, but he loved her fire, and if she needed someone to carry her into the dark, he would be that man. Their ship descended through the atmosphere like a stone sinking through liquid shadow. Epsilon 5's surface shimmered with a mineral sheen, veins of faint light running beneath translucent stone. Lena felt the pulse before the ship even landed, slow, deliberate, vast. It pressed against her skull like a thought not her own, a steady rhythm that seemed to echo her heartbeat. When they stepped onto the surface, the silence was complete. The planet was a plain of fractured glass and half-buried monoliths, obelisks that rose like black teeth toward the faint shimmer of a distant sun. Orion ran a gloved hand over one of the obelisks and drew back sharply. The stone hummed beneath his palm. "It's alive," he whispered. Lena only nodded. The readings from her instruments were impossible. The obelisks were not reflecting light but producing it, faint oscillations in the electromagnetic spectrum, rhythmic and recursive, as though something inside was breathing. They set up camp near the largest structure, a spire that rose miles into the thin sky. Its base was a maze of channels filled with frozen light. Lena spent the first night listening to the world hum. The sound was neither mechanical nor natural. It was organic in its rhythm, deliberate in its silence. By the second day, Orion began to dream of the lights beneath the surface. He saw the obelisks extending downward into the planet's crust, roots of some vast subterranean organism. He saw movement beneath the glass planes, shadows that pulsed in time with the rhythm. When he woke, his pulse still followed the same cadence. They entered the spire on the third day. Its interior was hollow and vast, the walls carved with flowing patterns that shimmered faintly when touched. Lena traced them with trembling fingers, and the air around her deepened. The resonance grew louder, more defined, and the shapes on the walls began to move. The patterns were not inscriptions but living circuits, the residue of the Varelthur's weaving. "This was one of their nexus stones," Lena murmured. "But it's still active." Orion pointed toward the far end of the chamber, where a pit opened downward, spiraling into darkness. From its depths came a faint, steady glow. "Whatever's alive here," he said, "it's under us." They descended carefully, the stone beneath their boots vibrating with every step. As they went deeper, the light grew stronger, lower, until it seemed to bleed through their skin. The walls throbbed in rhythm with their hearts, or perhaps it was the other way around. At the bottom, they found a vast chamber filled with suspended strands of translucent matter, fibers stretching in every direction, luminous and trembling. They connected the walls, the ceiling, the floor, all weaving through a pulsing core of light at the center. Lena approached it with reverence. "The climbing fibers," she whispered. "They never died." But even as she said it, the light shifted. It rippled in acknowledgement, like a creature stirring from sleep. The fibers began to tighten and pulse, each one singing at a slightly different frequency. The harmonics combined into a soundless chord that seemed to tear through the mind rather than the ear. Orion clutched his head and staggered backward. "It's inside me," he gasped. Lena reached out to the nearest strand, and when her fingers brushed it, visions flooded her mind. She saw the Varelther as they had been, beings of radiant energy and thought, weaving the universe itself. She saw their fall, their final sacrifice, the sealing of the Nexus, and then something more. She saw what had been trapped beneath the weave, not darkness, but hunger. The energy that had corrupted the fibers had not been destroyed. It had been imprisoned here, bound within the Nexus stone. The Varelther had not died to save the universe. They had died to keep it sleeping. The realization struck her with physical force. She fell to her knees, her hands trembling, her breath shallow. The fibers began to move faster, tightening, thrumming with a feverish rhythm. The air shimmered as the energy bled through, warping the chamber. Orion called to her, but his voice was distorted, echoing from multiple directions at once. He tried to pull her back, but the floor was no longer solid. It rippled beneath their feet, transparent waves of light exposing the machinery of existence beneath. Lena could see the threads connecting everything, their bodies, their thoughts, even the stars above. The fibers pulsed through them, alive and aware. And then the whisper came. It was not speech but intention, vast and wordless, pressing into her mind like the weight of eternity. The climbing fibers had awakened, and they remembered their purpose. They had been woven to connect all things, but now their connections had turned inward. They no longer reached outward to bind the universe together. They reached toward the core, toward whatever had been sealed within. The chamber began to collapse as the fibers withdrew from the walls, coiling toward the center. The light at the core expanded, swallowing shadow and stone alike. Orion grabbed Lena, dragging her toward the spiral, but the gravity of the light was immense. "We have to shut it down," she screamed. "How?" She stared at the walls, at the patterns that flowed like liquid thought. The Varelther had used resonance to weave and unweave the fibers, sound, vibration, pattern. If she could disrupt the frequency, perhaps she could contain it. She activated her field recorder, amplifying the resonance of her own voice. The first note she uttered trembled in the air. The fibers responded instantly, recoiling and pulsing with greater intensity. She sang another, deeper, a tone of defiance and sorrow, and the chamber shuddered. The light faltered. But something inside the core began to answer. A sound emerged from the depths, vast, cold, harmonic beyond human comprehension. The fibers quivered as the tone swept through them, a resonance that made every cell in her body ache. Orion screamed, collapsing, blood streaming from his nose. Lena realized too late that she had not silenced it, she had called it. The thing within the Nexus had no form that her mind could comprehend. It was not light nor shadow, but a presence, the raw consciousness of entropy itself. The Varelther had named it only in silence, for to give it a word was to give it form. It had waited through eons, feeding on the tension of the fibers, until her song had loosened its bonds. Reality began to fold. The air melted into geometric shapes, the floor split into mirrored planes. Orion reached for her, but his arm dissolved into strands of light, his body unraveling into the very fibers that bound the chamber. Lena felt her mind stretch beyond its limits. She saw galaxies bending, stars flickering out like candles, and the web of fibers vibrating through them all. The voice of the universe spoke through her, not in language but in feeling, a realization that consciousness itself was a thread, and the threads were now unraveling. She screamed, though no sound escaped her throat. Her body broke into light, merging with the fibers, and for a brief moment she saw what the Varelther had seen, the unity of all things, the terrible beauty of the weave. Then the light consumed her. When the research vessel returned months later, it found Epsilon 5 glowing faintly, a lattice of light spreading across its surface. The obelisks had come alive, sending pulses into the void, rhythmic, deliberate, alive. The pulse spread outward, touching other worlds, other systems, like ripples through water. Far away, on a quiet moon orbiting a forgotten planet, a young technician monitoring deep space signals paused as a strange rhythm appeared on her screen. It was faint but growing, a harmonic sequence repeating endlessly. She leaned closer, adjusting the receiver. It sounded almost like a heartbeat.